Thanks for tuning into the Urban Scope podcast, and I'm back with another hip hop topic. Now, this next topic I'm going to get into is probably the most discussed topic in hip hop over the last probably 5 or 10 years, just because of the dominance of what the South has brung. And of course, this topic is, has the South ruined hip hop? Now, the Dirty South is caught on after, of course, the West Coast's ascension and the East Coast's ascension. And then, of course, after the South, then the Midwest started to rise. So all of the pieces came into place at different times and different eras because we know hip hop started in New York and the East Coast is considered the Mecca. And then it ventured out to the West Coast and then it came out to the South. Then it went out to the Midwest. So, when you look at the landscape of hip hop, why did you have to ask yourself people say that the South ruined hip hop? Because nobody says that with the West Coast when they had the hyphy music, they had the Bay Area movement, they had the gangster rap music, which pretty much originated in California. They didn't say it then, and then even when Common put out I Used to Love Her, I Used to Love Her addressed it, hip hop going to the West Coast. So he was one of the first people to talk about that in that fashion. He really didn't talk about the South much because the South really wasn't out in 92. They were starting to get footing and people started to make moves. But for the most part, a lot of hip hop's dissension has been blamed on the South. And I thought a couple of reasons. I said, well, maybe it's because Atlanta and because the South had dances. But when I started to think about it, I said, no, it can't be that. Atlanta had the snap rap and they had the dance craves, but so did New York. They had the chicken noodle soup and they had the lip gloss, and California had to teach me how to Dougie, and Texas had their, dance moves and things like that. Everybody had a dance in every region, so it couldn't have been that, and I think it was just um, they had to have somebody to blame. Uh, and I don't think it's just the East Coast that had the South to blame, but I think once somebody becomes so dominant, we start blaming people. Look at the Patriots. When they got so dominant, people was like, oh, well, they're cheating. Tom Brady did this and Belichick did this and they're bending the rules here, or when the Bulls were good, they had to say, well, they had Scottie Pippen and they had Michael Jordan. And when LeBron was dominant, people was like, oh, he's on performance enhancing drugs and yada, yada. So when somebody's dominant, they have to have an excuse for something because the South, unlike other areas, had multiple areas that dominated the hip hop form. Because when you look at New York, it's mostly New York City with the five boroughs. I mean, you have some artists in New Jersey who were pretty good. So you mostly had Jersey and then you had New York. You didn't have Boston. You didn't really have. I mean, I guess you can count Philly in the East Coast mix. But when you think about the South, they had too many different dominant areas. Just to start off with New Orleans, for example, they had the Cash Money era, they had the Young Money era, they had No Limit, they got NBA YoungBoy now, they had Boosie. Uh, well, if you count Louisiana, Boosie's from Baton Rouge, I believe. But that whole era, and then Atlanta, their ascension since Outkast, they've had tons of artists. Whether you want to name Ti, you got you got Ti, you got Outkast, you have uh, Big Boy. I mean, you got Killer Mike, you got Future and what he's doing, Lil Baby, uh, B.O.B. They've had a tons of artists, and they've become the mecca of hip hop now because of the plethora of artists that they're putting out. That's not just regionally, but you know, nationwide, globally. A lot of these stars work with a lot of countries and a lot of different people. Future, I didn't even mention Future and the movement that he had with Ghana and all these different artists. So Atlanta had a movement. So that's two places. Memphis's rise. We know what 3 6 Mafia did. We know what Yo Gotti and Young Dolph and Glorilla, Pooh Shiesty, Young Dolph, Moneybag Yo, all of these people had. So Memphis had a run or has a run right now with the artists they have. And we don't, I mean, Florida, if you're talking about Florida and Miami specifically and the groups that they had with Rick Ross and Two Live Crew back in the day, um, you know, Kodak Black. And then if you take it outside of that era, they have Flo Rida and then they have Plies. So they had a large group of Floridians that were doing great things in hip hop, but they just added to the South's rise. And then we talk about Texas with Scarface and Paul Wall and Big X the Plug and Lil Flip and the screw music that they had and just the sound that they've created, even with artists like a Travis Scott. And then just even to add on Mississippi, who had Big Crit and David Banner, and you can even credit Ray Shremmerd and Soldier Boy, who was technically born in those states, even though they ventured off to Atlanta, but they originally were from um, Mississippi. So it just makes me think, why do people hate the South? Because when you have something, like I said, it creates this resentment. And I think New York was dominant for so long because hip hop started off in the 70s and they lost their reins and, started to lose their reins and towards the 2000s. They had it for about 30 years. But if you look over probably the last 20 plus years, it's been the South and Atlanta specifically. Now, everything has been tied to Atlanta, people calling it Red Atlanta, people talking about putting dirt on Atlanta's name just to try to get the glow off of Atlanta. But Atlanta has become the mecca, not just for hip hop, but for blacks altogether because it's seen as Black Hollywood. When you see all these reality shows and all of these concerts and all of these attractions, they reside in Atlanta, and so does hip hop. So a lot of people have resentment for Atlanta and for the South because of the attractions they're starting to have. Even when you look at a city like Nashville, it doesn't have a lot of hip hop artists in it, but it's starting to get a lot of traction for being one of those spots. Even though it's a country music town, but people are starting to move there. It's not too far from Atlanta. So the South is starting to have a lot of attractions. And when you look at artists from New York, most of those artists have influence from the South now. When you look at a Nicki Minaj, her impact is built off the back of Gucci Mane and Lil Wayne, who are two Southern artists. French Montana, he's connected to Fat Joe and DJ Khaled, what he was able to do. Cardi B, her her ascension is tied to the Migos and of course her ex-husband or current husband, Offset. So New York has been influenced by the South. Even when you look at an artist like Designer who made the Panda song, that was an Atlanta sounding song that we thought that was Future at one point. So it just shows you that Atlanta and the South have a huge influence on hip hop, and it's starting to be muddied up by just conspiracies about Atlanta and even about the South, because the South has so many influences and regions, and hip hop really doesn't live in California, and it doesn't live in New York like it once did. Now, if you want to make an argument, Midwest had a nice little reign over the last, 10 plus years with their Eminem and um, the Chi-Town movement with Kanye and with Common and Lupe Fiasco and those great guys and what they contributed as well. So it was a huge contribution that it's just not in East Coast no more. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's an important thing for the growth of hip hop. If we have more regions highlighted, then we have a better collective as a whole. It's not about a region or making somebody better. It's just about how can we get hip hop to the best place that it can be because it still has a long ways to go. And we want to see that ascension continue. So tell me, what are your thoughts about the South? People's theories about the South ruining hip hop. And until next time, I'll see you next time.